Hey, good morning. Look at this cute little water bottle. You guys have gotten these out front? Someone asked me if I would like a water bottle. I said, yes, please. Thank you, Donovan. Yeah, I'm Jaymi Cross. I'm the worship pastor here. Been the worship pastor for since the inception of Garden City, so for the past 2 years. It has been my genuine honor and privilege to lead here as a team. Our goal, or as like the things that we talk about, like our ultimate aim in leading worship is to create space for people to encounter Jesus. Like that's our primary aim. And you guys, this congregation or this culture, this environment is one that leans in and presses in, and not like we don't. When we're in corporate worship, we're going as a group. So your guys's, your buy-in is a beautiful thing to be a part of. So thank you for your courage, and thank you guys for your hearts. First of all, how are we doing? Yeah, good. Okay. Sometimes I'll get into this and I'll I don't know, just to kind of take an actual awareness of where we're at and how we're doing and what we're doing and how we're feeling. Is anyone still cold? Like I'm up here. Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bunch of cold people. I came in here. It was a lot colder like a half an hour ago. The heater is catching up, and I think the warm bodies help. But is anyone like a full-on winter person? Like we love winter. Luke's the only one. No one else. Like no winter people? Really? Okay. What about like the Christmas people? Like take the winter, give me Christmas. The delusional people. I mean. Okay, yeah, because that's me. I'll take Christmas. I just don't want the cold. We had our staff meeting maybe a couple weeks ago, and someone on staff, I won't say who it is, but someone on staff was like, "Oh, I'm loving the clouds, and it's so dark and dreary, and I'm just in my element, and I have so much energy." So is anyone like that? Like we love a dreary day. Okay, 1, 2. That's Carrington, Michelle, that's my brother. I didn't know, man. I was about, okay, well, some of y'all maybe can just be friends and then the sunshine people will be friends. No, we can all be friends. Okay. We'll get into my message after I tell this joke. I've been a dad for about 8 months, and I have not told nearly enough dad jokes. So I thought I'd like tell 200 people, 250 people one joke, and then they'll kind of like hit my quota. What do you call a medieval spy? Anyone? Surveillance. Do you guys surveillance? Okay. Carrington, you get it? Okay. You didn't fall out of your chair laughing, so I thought maybe. Okay, let us pray. Jesus, we thank you so much that you are constant and consistent, and that you are always here, and every time we turn our attention to you, you are ever present, and that you desire to meet with us. Thank you that every morning we wake up, you are right there with us, no matter the context, no matter the season. And thank you that you are building your church, you're building your kingdom, and that you're restoring this world. Father, we pray for courage to hear your voice, intimacy to hear your voice, and courage to follow you. We give you every bit of glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, I have titled my message, Worship. I couldn't come up with any cool little tagline for the bottom. But I'm going to be talking about worship, and I'm going to try and some of this worship. You guys have probably heard that a heart posture of worship, or that your lives can be worship. I'm going to try and talk about the underlying. I have a quote in a quote in here that I'm going to get to, but I'm going to try and talk about the underlying principles and the tenets of worship that apply to both us in a corporate gathering and, more than that, us in our day-to-day lives. So we're kind of going to be going into a mix of both. As corporate worship, I obviously have a very high value for corporate worship. Excuse me, but it is something that is that worship is a heart posture, and worship is a way of life. So we're going to be trying to touch on both. I did think it was interesting. Even like I've been leading worship for a long time, but when it comes to like when I would if you would just ask me like what is worship, like it's such a deep thing that it's hard to put in a single sentence. But and then I think that oftentimes, just because I am involved in corporate worship, I have to think of why we engage in corporate worship the way that we do. And the other week, I asked Aaron. Aaron was leading acoustic and singing. I asked him if he thought that David playing the harp was like more holy than us playing like acoustic. Like why we would have so many instruments up here. I don't think it's a bad thing. Just to clarify, I love all the instruments. I was just curious, and it was funny. I was like, so do you think maybe David playing the harp was holier than you playing the electric guitar? And he's kind of laughing. He's like, actually, maybe. I think that he was maybe talking. I mean, David was a man after God's own heart, but I think he was talking about the heart posture. But it is interesting to take a look at the things that we tend to get caught up in. Like we tend to get caught up in singing a fast song or a slow song, or singing hymns versus more modern worship. And I really don't think that the heart of worship has nearly as much to do with, like, I think David's heart posture and our heart posture can actually be aligned in a really beautiful way. Okay, so worship is, I believe that worship is and does a few different things. I'm going to open up with John chapter 4, verses 23 and 24. It's the story of, John 4 is the story of when Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well. And I think that there's some really beautiful comparisons in here that we'll touch on kind of at the end of the sermon as well. But John 4, 23 through 24, yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and in truth. So a little bit of context. This is, like I said, when Jesus, John 4 is when Jesus stops by the well and is talking to the Samaritan woman. He had just come from, it says that he was tired from his long journey, and it was about 12 o'clock, and he's sitting by this well, and this lady comes up, and he asks her for a drink of water. They have this conversation that we'll kind of touch on later too, but eventually she's a Samaritan. Jews and Samaritans were not getting along. They hadn't gotten along for a long time. Samaritans had kind of departed from, Samaritans only accepted how many books is the Torah? First 5 books? Yeah. First, the Samaritans only accepted those first 5 books. They were missing a lot of covenant, and they were also bringing in some outside ideas on how to worship and who to worship. So there was idolatry kind of in the mix, but they were claiming that they were aimed at worshiping the one true God. So there was this it was this really big divide on specifically the Samaritans and the Jews. They were both really, really tied up in where to worship and how to worship. And she's asking about the where. So she's very like, what are the practices and how do we do this perfectly and correctly. And it's almost she was like trying to test Jesus, or like, I'm not sure what her exact goal is. We'd have to infer it, but like just looking at the story and watching how they're interacting with each other. I don't know. She asks him, she's like, the Jews say that we should worship in Jerusalem, and the Samaritans worshiped on, she just said the mountain, but they were worshiping on Mount Gerizim. So they were primarily focused on the where, and the how, and it reminds me a lot, like that dispute and that dialogue, those questions that they got all wrapped up in. The reason that there was this giant divide between Samaritans and the Jews was because it would almost like, it could almost be a lot like the divide that we could feel in different styles and different traditions, and people that are like really, really close-fisted about like, oh, we need to have these specific things, or in our corporate worship sets. But the conclusion that I'm coming to is that worship really isn't about the where and the how, more than it's about the who and the why. Does that make sense? Like we're worshiping Jesus because he's worthy. It's our response to his worthiness, rather than worship being about the what and the where. So I'm gonna read John 4 again, but this time I'm gonna skip back a step. John 4:21 through 24. Woman, Jesus replied, "Believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. And yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and the truth." So Jesus redefines worship entirely in this moment. She's asking, what's the correct, how do I worship correctly? Do I worship on the mountain? Do I worship in Jerusalem? And Jesus is like, no. That he's looking for, that he says that God is looking for people to worship in spirit and in truth. It's a whole new paradigm for how we engage with God. It's no longer about performing the perfect ritual, or traveling far enough, or working hard enough, or working our internal world up enough in order to offer righteous worship. So we're trying to figure out what worship is, or I am, what Jesus is asking us. And so far we know that we're meant to worship in spirit and truth. Another way to say that we're meant to worship in spirit and truth is that worship is meant to be empowered by the Holy Spirit and aligned with the truth of who God is, as revealed in the person of Jesus. So this is the combination of the still small voice that's leading you and guiding you and directing you in every single aspect of our lives. In combination with seeking out his wisdom. I think that this is our Bible study times. This is our trying to figure out who the Old Testament God was, who he is now. But like, there's a lot of, oftentimes in the Bible, it's not that it's hard to understand, but it's like if we're not actually taking the time and giving the text the respect that it deserves, because it's beautiful and it's incredibly deep. So doing our work to understand historical and cultural context, and to know God, so that our worship can be directed by truth and by the person of Jesus. So this is the best that I could come up with to describe worship in a sentence, or what I think that worship is beyond corporate worship, but like to live a life of worship. This is what I think that worship is currently. Worship is our wholehearted response to God's worthiness, expressed through surrender, adoration, and alignment with His will. It's a response. It's a response to His goodness. It's not a. It can't be a task. Like it can't be a checkbox. I don't think. I don't think that's like Jesus is saying we need to worship in spirit and in truth. I think that as soon as it gets to be like a regulated thing, or like something that like feels like really heavy and pressury, I don't know. I think we might be missing it. I think that, so worship being a wholehearted response to God's worthiness or to God's goodness, on a lot of levels, I believe that it is surrender. So bringing our full hearts to the Lord, not exactly knowing what's going to happen or what He's going to do, but trusting that whatever He does and whatever He asks us to do is going to be better than anything that we could figure out on our own. This is true for corporate worship and living our regular lives. I don't think that worship is regulated to having. I was gonna do this joke. I had a lot of jokes, but I was gonna do this, and Heidi was like, "Well, people might not know that. People might not know you well enough to know that you're kidding." But I was gonna get up here and be like, "Guys, I figured out the perfect way to worship. You need one bass guitar, one acoustic guitar, one piano, and you have to have synths behind them, and you need to have drums. And then you sing a fast song, a slightly slower song, and then a really slow song, and then that's worship." I just don't, I mean, like, that is worship, man. Vince, you're not off the hook. I still need you on drums. It's not like, I don't think that worship is regulated to like, or gate kept by having a certain amount of instruments as proven this morning. I mean, like, if y'all were engaging with worship, that it seemed like the entire room was engaged with worship this morning, and it was like 3 people and an acoustic and a bass. And I don't mean that to make it sound like less than. Like, my point being is, whether we have one acoustic guitar, a cappella, a full band, 2 electric guitars, maybe someday we'll have 2 electric guitars. But like, the point being is, like, I think that when we, like, our go-to about what is worship, we oftentimes immediately think about people on the stage in a very specific context. I'm like, I just don't want to miss the boat on anything, because I think that, like, genuinely, God is here always. Like, as soon as we turn our attention to Him, He's in the room, and there's always opportunity to worship, from the time that you get up in the morning all the way to Sunday. Oh man, I got off my notes. Yeah, if worship is not defined by certain instruments and certain songs being sung, we can always have a reason. We can always have a response to His worth in every context we find ourselves in. So if worship is our wholehearted response to God's worthiness, expressed through surrender, adoration, and alignment with His will, that expressed through part, I'd like to see if I can tackle some of the tenets of worship, not the laws of worship, but like a tenet. A tenet is like a principle or a guiding or beliefs that guide. I just want to be really careful to not set like a. I think that the best response to worship is the one that He's asking you to respond with. Does that make sense? But these are some tenets of worship, principles or beliefs that guide worship. So this is expressed through surrender, adoration, and alignment. So surrender, adoration, and alignment. Three tenets of worship. I'm sure that there's a lot of ways to talk about this. This is was really helpful for me to think about. So surrender. This is a daily invitation for every part of our lives. This is laying down what we think is best. This is God says wait, and you don't want to wait, and you want to make something happen, but you know deep down, like the still small voice is telling you to wait. This is when God says go, and you don't want to go because you're scared or whatever it is, but you know deep down that you're supposed to go. This is even on like on an emotional level. I think that oftentimes, we can wait to engage with God until we feel clean enough, worthy enough, lovey-dovey enough, goosebumpy enough, insert whatever it is. I think that we can oftentimes wait on our emotions. Like we almost like think that our emotions are gatekeeping us from God. So to be able to have the understanding that surrender is, I'm not talking about putting on a mask and, jumping around in circles, or I'm not talking about like performing the actions before you feel the feeling. This is not a fake it till you make it type of situation. That's not at all what I'm saying. But to have a genuine heart posture of vulnerability when you come before the Lord and bring whatever you have with you before him. Because he's the one that helps us sort it out, right? Like I'm not going to wait to get my stuff in order and then come to God when he's the one that helps me order my stuff. So like we put the cart before the horse, and then we think that and it's very sneaky. I think that as we grow in God and grow with God, it's like this beautiful process of finding ways where we're withholding ourselves from him. Because the more that we actually allow him, the more that we surrender and allow him to shape us and guide us, the more that our knee-jerk reactions become lined up with him. And this is the process of worship, is this we're presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice, and ultimately is what transforms us. Sometimes it's as simple as sacrificing our preferences. Like I said, going back to this is maybe more of a corporate worship example, but there are certain songs that I like more than others. There are certain songs that I engage that just kind of have a natural bend that I do enjoy more. But I think being willing to come before the Lord and to bring ourselves before the Lord in whatever context, and not waiting for our preferences to be met before we pour out adoration for a worthy God. I wrote down that surrender is not cutting off your arms and legs for Jesus. There is a difference between religious surrender and relational surrender. I think that religious, sometimes we'll hear surrender or repentance and sacrifice, and it feels like a heavy thing. It feels like a really weighty thing. And I don't think that that's how it was meant to be. I think that Jesus, not to take away from the gravity of the importance of our surrender, but I think you can tell the difference between a religious surrender versus a relational one. Relational surrender is not driven by fear. Even the Pharisees made sacrifices, so it's not about the actual. It really is about the heart posture. Psalm 51, 15 and 18. If we can put that up too. David wrote this after his debacle with Bathsheba. This is the psalm that's talking about create in me a clean heart, O Lord. And he's asking a lot of that psalm is him asking for forgiveness. But at the top, and then in verse 15 through 18, he says, "Open my lips, Lord, and my mouth will declare your praise. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise." Even David knew that the Lord was after a heart posture rather than a material action or like a physical action. And throughout the Bible, we see a lot of examples of humans laying down their trust issues, their grievances, their pride, their understanding, their money, their time, their pain, and their offenses to worship Jesus. This surrender is the only sacrifice that he's asking you for, not to wait to come close until you have everything put together, but to come close, listen, and surrender. And the cool thing is like, it is a much more carefree way to live. It's a much more freedom-oriented way to live, to know that I don't have to have my ducks in a row before I come before the Lord. And it's a much more efficient way to live, because I'm a very curious guy, and I like to spend time trying to think things through. And I will think circles around myself, and which I think is fine. I think it's good. It's just for me to remember to do it with the Lord, because he tends to sort me out quite a bit quicker. Like this sounds crazy, guys. Sometimes I'll forget to ask God stuff. I don't know, am I the only one? I hope I'm not, man. It's just it's just like, I get caught up in trying to figure out and trying to be strategic and trying to be smart. And I'm not saying don't try and figure stuff out. I think it's great. But to be engaging with God as we try and figure this stuff out, and ultimately as an act of worship, to surrender to his ways. Okay, so we are at adoration. I was going to read that quote again. Worship is our wholehearted response to God's worthiness, expressed through surrender, adoration, and alignment with his will. Psalm 27:4. These are all in the NIV translation, by the way. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and seek him in his temple. So adoration is honoring and glorifying God for who he is, mainly his character and his attributes and his nature. It's turning all of our attention and a full focus on who he is. Oftentimes, I don't want to like put specific category or put specific actions behind all three of these tenets, because I think that they kind of like dovetail together beautifully and all kind of work together. But oftentimes, I would see adoration being played out in the natural, or played out physically in worship. Like this is us giving a physical demonstration and an intentional exaltation of his nature. Okay, I need to stop to take a drink. Excuse me. I was going to say talk amongst yourselves, but that would be distracting probably. We express our adoration corporately with music, singing, raising of hands, kneeling before him. We adore him by standing in awe, by dancing with joy, with tears and laughter. I thought a good way for me to think about it would be like, how do you, when you think about, I was like, how do I adore God? It helped me. The comparison falls apart because it's just not quite the same. But if you would think about like how you would adore your wife or your husband or a really close friend, like how you would express your adoration for someone that you were deeply in love with. Except for that, it's on a whole nother level because it's the King of Kings. at the same time, when I was asking Aaron about David playing the harp, it struck me I had never researched if the Psalms were like well thought out, organized, structured songs like for congregational singing, or if they were more like spontaneous, in the flow, like musings of David. It turns out the Psalms are full of both. Like there are actual songs that David wrote for congregational singing, and there is free flowing thought and engagement with God. But in terms of worship expressed through adoration, I mean, we see David, like in the practical sense, we see David actually writing songs and having structure and having corporate worship, and then we also see David like dancing spontaneously and wildly and offensively, but before the Lord. So I think that there's room for both spontaneity and individual and corporate expression. But I think adoration is seeking his face before we seek his hands. So if we are directed towards his character, and we are in surrender, and we look for his face, and genuinely have a surrendered posture of like, we want what you have because of how beautiful we are. We want what you have for us because we trust you. We want what you have for us because we're willing to sacrifice our understanding of exactly how you show up or exactly how you move. I think that's adoration. And then oftentimes as we express our adoration, we see him more clearly. There's a song, the more I seek you, the more I find you, the more I find you, the more I love you. And that seems to be the case. The more we seek, the more we find, the more we love, which makes us want to seek more. And it's like this beautiful cycle. Like adoration does that. Like it's like, I heard this guy say one time that the kingdom, I'm going to butcher it, but I can't remember exactly how he put it, but it was something like the more you eat, the hungrier you get. And I think that adoration is sort of like that as well. Okay, we're gonna move to the expression of worship by aligning ourselves with God's will. So again, what we're aimed at here is we're trying to talk about what worship actually is, and that it's more than a specific set of acts. It's more than a Sunday morning. It's a heart posture and a directive of our lives. So how are we walking that out, and what does that accomplish? So to align with God's will is to intentionally bring our thoughts, desires, decisions, emotions, and actions before him with open hands. We hold our world with open hands and allow him to shape it. This is kind of in surrender territory, but I think that it's okay. Like I said, all these tenets kind of like help each other out and ping pong off of each other. But this is like to really actually hold our perspectives in front of the Lord, and to allow him to move us and shape us. Oftentimes, like when I don't know about you guys. Oftentimes when I hear that still small voice and it's something that I know to be true, oftentimes it requires more courage from me to follow and pursue than if I would just do things the way that I think that I should do things, or things that make sense to me. But I think aligning, if we are aimed at worshiping in spirit and truth, this is I think that this is how we do it. I think that this is how we worship in truth, is by allowing God to shape us and form us into ever more into His image. I do believe that it's an act of worship to obey God, not as a, I know obedience can feel like a heavy thing, or like even just the word obedience can have this like heavy, weighty kind of feeling, like taskmastery feeling. But I think that's oftentimes because we're putting the lens of whether it's our Father, our earthly Father, or a religious experience that we had at some point, or even like a political experience, like we're putting some lenses. I think that's it's because we're putting lenses on God. We're putting our own lenses on our eyes, and as we look at God, we see Him through our lenses. Obedience and surrender and sacrifice, and these are gifts. Like these are gifts that we get. That like what I was saying, that it's much more carefree to live a life of surrender. Like, thank God I'm not responsible for my own destiny. Like, thank God I'm not the one ultimately responsible to hold the world together, or hold my world together. It's like this, it is the gift of God that we are followers of Jesus. Like, thank God. So yeah, I'm gonna ask the worship team to come up at this time. All these tenets go hand in hand. These are rules, not principles. Excuse me. These are not rules. They are principles. I almost ruined my whole sermon right there. But please don't hear them as rules. Please don't hear them as a to-do list or something that, like, an extra. It's like, oh, now I have I have to worship. Or I have to get it right. I think that worship is an invitation to encounter His presence, man. And this is what we need. This is what the world needs. We're talking about preparing the way, and John the Baptist. Ultimately, worship is our wholehearted response to God's worthiness, and that is being in His presence is what transforms us. Allowing Him to shape us is what transforms us. Surrendering to His will is what transforms us. Gazing upon the glory and the beauty and the faithfulness of God is actually what transforms us, on like a physical level too. It actually, as we change the way that we think, like our brain. Nick, can you help me out? Neuroplasticity, that's a thing, right? Yeah, it's a thing. He's a doctor, he knows. But neuroplasticity, it's like your brain will actually physically change to, so like the Romans, like, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. As we actually like have these practices of allowing the Lord to change the way that we think, we are actually transformed, like in the physical and in the spiritual, which will ultimately transform the world around us. So we're talking about preparing the way, a lifestyle of worship that transforms us will ultimately transform this earth. Going back to the Canaanite lady, she had her life transformed by choosing to engage with Jesus. Her life was far from put together when she came to Jesus. It's likely, I'm inferring a little bit, or I read some commentators that were inferring anyways, but they think that it's like likely that she would have come to the well at noon when there wasn't as many people there, and so, or like when there was like most likely because like Jesus was talking about that she's had 5 husbands, and the husband that she's with now is not hers. Like, it doesn't sound like she was she was probably living in a bunch of shame, is what I'm trying to say. And yet she chose to tell the truth and to present herself honestly to Jesus. She got over any kind of sense of unworthiness. She even pushed back a little bit to Jesus. Like I'm so sorry, I'm trying to find it. Jesus is basically, so they're having this conversation, and Jesus is asking her for a drink, and he says that he has water that will that she'll never thirst again. And she made this comment where she's like, who are you that you like? Do you think that you're better than our father Jacob? So almost like she did have a little bit of offense. Well, like that's her humanity coming through, I think. But when he talked about the living water, at the end of verse 24, he says, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ, and when he comes, he will tell us all things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. She got so excited. She believed him and got so excited that she left the pot that she was carrying to run into town to tell the people. Like what she came out there to do didn't matter nearly much anymore because she had encountered Jesus. She went and told the town about Jesus out of overflow of love and awe. And what was really, really cool about it is that many Samaritans actually came to know Jesus that day. This worship inevitably transforms not just our lives, but the world around us. Just in closing, can we stand and can we get the... Actually, let's maybe close our eyes. We often get caught in this false trap that the conditions need to be just right to approach Jesus, to know Jesus deeply or more deeply than we do. We wait to worship. We wait for connection. We wait for understanding. We wait for knowledge. We wait until our pain has dissipated. We wait until our shame is gone. We wait for an emotional experience. Or maybe we just wait for Sunday. But all that waiting, and the answer is just to come and to seek, to respond to his goodness. And he's always faithful to meet us exactly where we are.